I'm going to begin with a quotation from Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House. Now, she said, "How lucky the United States is to have reserves of natural gas, because otherwise we'd have to depend on fossil fuels." Nearly as good as Stephen Guilbeault of Greenpeace, who said, "Global warming may mean cooling. It may mean hotter. It may mean drier. It may mean wetter. That's what we're talking about." Every climate change is a disaster. Now, the day before yesterday, these people, and I'm told by Joe Bast I'm not allowed to call them bedwetters, they called it, so I'm going to call them people who have difficulty containing certain very personal bodily functions when they are in a horizontal position at night. So the day before yesterday, those people called it global warming. Yesterday they called it climate change. Today they call it energy security. And tomorrow, thanks to you here in this room, they will call it what it is: absolute rubbish. At the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, not, you may think, the snappiest of titles, they probably would not call a spade a spade. That would be too simple. They would call it a one-person-operated, manually controlled, foot-powered implement of simple and robust, yet adequately efficacious lignometallic composition, designated primarily, though by no means exclusively, for utilization on the part of hourly paid operatives deployed in the agricultural, horticultural, or constructional trades or industries, as the case may be, for purposes of carrying out such excavational tasks or duties as may, from time to time, be designated by supervisory grades as being necessary, expedient, desirable, apposite, or germane, with regard to the ongoing furtherance of the task or objective in hand, or on the other hand, under foot, Secretary General. The climate documents of the UN are militantly obscurantist. Month by month, they grow ever more absurd. Now look at this graph of global temperatures in Celsius degrees over the last 150 years. It appears in the UN's 2007 climate assessment. It appears in a lecture by the chairman of its climate science panel, and who knows what his occupation is. He is a railway engineer. It appears in a technical document supporting a decision by the US EPA to regulate CO2 as a pollutant, and it also appears in a recent slideshow by a former director at the Woods Hole Oceanographic Research Institution. It is one of the poster children for climate alarm. What it purports to show, these railway lines of Dr. Pachauri on the graph, is that over 150 years, there's not much of a temperature increase, but if you take the last 100 years, it's steeper. The last 50 years, steeper still. The last 25 years, steeper still. Now, this statistical technique is entirely bogus, and no respectable scientist or public authority would ever have used it. It is a disgrace and an outrage that this is the kind of argument that is being put before us. It is well known that stochastic data curves, those where you can't guess which way they're going to jump next, are highly sensitive to the selection of endpoints for linear regression trends. For instance, the trend on that graph from 1905 to 1945 is twice as steep as the trend from 1905 to the present. Hooray, problem solved. It gets better. The trend from 1993 to 2009 is +3 Fahrenheit per century, from 1997 +1, from 2001 -2, And from 2005, this is the year that Gore brought out his mawkish sci-fi comedy horror movie, it's -10. The Almighty has a sense of humor. Now, what we've done here is we have used the same bogus statistical technique that the UN and railroad engineer Pachauri, Casey Jones of the IPCC, have used. And we have shown precisely the opposite result. Both of us are wrong. This is not a technique that should be used. Here is how it should be done. You will see that the slope on the right there, which I've coloured in rather repellent magenta, is precisely identical to the slopes that appear from 1860 to 1880 and again from 1910 to 1940. Now, I was so fascinated when I spotted this that I got out the original data that underlay this graph and plotted it to check on the computer that indeed these slopes are as identical as they appear to be. And then I had a question put down in the House of Lords about it, and we now have the confirmation of Her Majesty's government, who consulted the IPCC, that there is absolutely no anthropogenic signal whatsoever in the temperature record, so that graph was entirely bogus, and that is the truth. Here is another graph you know well, and I put this graph here for two reasons. First of all, it's not only that they've abolished the medieval warm period, or tried to, it's also that at the right-hand end, they have overstated the warming of the 20th century by very, very nearly 50%. And that's something you don't normally see mentioned. But my main reason for showing you this graph, which you all know very well, is that my good friend Craig Idso, for the Centre for the Study of Carbon Dioxide and Climate Change, maintains a medieval warm period database of scientists and institutions and countries in which research has been published over the last couple of decades, establishing that the medieval warm period was real, was global, and was warmer than the present. And the number of scientists who have written and contributed to such papers has now just risen over 700 for the first time, from 400 institutions in more than 40 countries. So I think he deserves a round of applause for that. And I think we should tell him that now that he no longer has the excuse of writing the non-intergovernmental panel's magnificent report, he'd better get on with his work, because he still has 500 papers on the medieval warm period which he hasn't yet had time to read. So, Craig, get on with your work. So, moving along, we come to the UN's latest gaseous halation, which is a report by a committee of what Francis Bacon used to call small men in great place, under Kofi Annan, a former Secretary General. And this report says 300,000 people are dying every year because of global warming. How dare they? How dare the UN ignore the unprecedented food riots in a dozen regions over the past 18 months, riots directly caused by widespread starvation, directly caused by doubling of world food prices, directly caused by the millions of acres of agricultural land that no longer grow food for starving people that need it, but instead grow biofuels for automobiles that don't, directly caused by a global scam, directly caused by the UN's lunatic policy of bad science, false alarm, and preemptive cringe. There is the temperature record for the last 7.5 years. We've heard various people saying maybe it hasn't gone down very much. It is now going down faster than any of those three rising slopes that I showed you before, and has been doing so for getting on for 8 years now. There is a clear cooling trend in the data. And after 8 years of that cooling trend, how dare they say that 300,000 people a year are being killed by warming? Now, this you may perhaps recognize. We have a program in the UK called the News Quiz, in which the audience are asked to identify what item in the news this was. Would anyone like to tell us what this is? Well, this is Stephen Chew's proposal to paint the roofs and the roads white so as to reflect all that evil sunlight back into space and save the planet from global warming. Now consider, if you will, Stephen Chew, the US Energy Secretary, no less, a member of the President's Cabinet, somebody who is supposed to be a serious individual, has made this daft proposal. The media have widely, solemnly and uncritically reported this notion, but few have bothered to verify whether it makes any sense. So now, I just love it when the audience are ahead of me. Like the Chattanooga locomotive whose name he bears, the choo-choo exists in a previous century, gets all steamed up about nothing, goes slowly and pointlessly backwards and forwards over the same ground, pulls a lot of fellow travellers and baggage along with him, makes scary hooting and howling noises from time to time, keeps on missing points, is invariably late, and demands massive federal subsidies to keep the whole show on the rails. Well, it won't be long before that particular gravy train tips into the gulch, and here's why. Poor Choo-Choo hasn't noticed, but some 75% of the Earth's surface is covered in water, which can't be painted, or ice, which doesn't need to be. That leaves 25%, of which maybe 2% has roofs or roads on it, and we're being generous there. At most, then, we can actually paint, with Choo-Choo's scheme, 0.5% of the Earth's surface. But getting on for half the globe is covered in clouds, which already reflect solar radiation, and they don't need painted either. Most buildings and roads are not in the tropics, where most of the sunlight arrives and needs reflecting back from. White paint, in any case, is not a perfect reflector. Up to a third of the Earth's landmass is already covered in snow for up to half the year, and half the incoming radiation from the sun is long wave at the point of arrival and interacts with the atmosphere on the way in. Problems. So the paint fest that the Choo-Choo recommends here will only forestall around 0.1% of global warming. I see the figure 5 being held up. Is that the number of hours remaining to me, or is it marks out of 10 for my performance so far? The UN, don't do that again. We're enjoying ourselves. Now, the UN says the planet will warm by 8 Fahrenheit degrees this century. This is an exaggeration of around an order of magnitude, as we shall see. So Secretary Chew's wizard wheeze will cool the planet by an impressive 0.0008 to 0.008 Fahrenheit degrees by 2100. Now, here we have on the top half of the slide here the costings, which are very important to do. We have to make sure that this measure is cost effective. As you'll see, the area of the Earth's surface is 510 million square kilometers. 0.5% of that is 2,550 billion. You've got to multiply that by 66 coats of paint. That's 168 trillion square meters of paint, divided by 10 liters to give you 17 trillion liters, and that's going to cost you, even if you go to Walmart and buy their bin ends of white paint, it's going to cost you $1 a litre. So you're looking at $17 trillion to save potentially as little as 0.0008 Fahrenheit of global warming. And that is a bargain compared with the Waxman-Markey bill, to which we now turn. Now, Waxman and Markey call themselves Democrats, but are they? A few weeks ago, the elected minority in the House asked me to testify before their committee in response to my fellow Nobel laureates' usual tired litany of imagined inconveniences, misfortunes, crises, débâcles, disasters, extinctions, catastrophes, cataclysms, Armageddons, and apocalypses. But Waxman and Markey didn't want Gore gored, as it were, so they tore up the First Amendment to your Constitution and refused to allow the chosen nominee of the elected minority the freedom to testify. Now it's payback time. The stated ambition of the bill is to demonstrate what is laughably called leadership by pointlessly shutting down 5/6 of the economic activity of your great nation. Yet no legislation against carbon emissions, however pious its intention, however drastic its effect, can ever be cost-effective. Why? Because to prevent just 2 Fahrenheit degrees of warming, we must forego 2 to 20 trillion tonnes of CO2 emissions. Now, the annual emissions cuts that Waxman and Markey are proposing are 5 billion out of the 6 billion tonnes that are being emitted. So the cooling per year that will be achieved only at the point in 20, 30, 40 or never years' time when the bill is fully implemented, and they have shown maximum leadership by closing down as much of the economy as possible, they will have saved 0.0005 to 0.005 Fahrenheit per year. Now, at that rate, to prevent the 8 Fahrenheit degrees predicted by the UN of warming to 2100 is actually going to take them between 1600 and 16,000 years. Now, we know what this bill is going to cost because the White House memo leaking it said that it was going to be $180 billion a year. Multiply that by 1600 to 16,000 years, and the cost of this modest proposal is only 300 to 3,000 trillion dollars. And what is extraordinary is that none of this is necessary anyway, because 3 years ago I began to smell a rat when I couldn't find anywhere in these enormous documents of the UN any mention of how to convert the radiative forcing from carbon dioxide in watts per square metre into temperature change. Now, this was a puzzling omission because the only scientific question that really matters in this debate is the question how much warming a given proportionate increase in carbon dioxide concentration will actually cause. I searched the entire 2001 and 2007 reports of the UN's turgid climate panel, all 2,500 pages of waffle. The search term Stefan Boltzmann, for that is the name of the fundamental equation of radiative transfer, did not appear once in either of these 2 documents. And this was strange because in that number of pages there was certainly space to try to explain this to people whom they are trying to convince that they've got things right. So it was and is a startling omission. And here is why they didn't want you to know about this fundamental equation. Now, on this entirely simple and self-explanatory slide, we start with the data. The green data are actual measured data for temperature, CO2, and incoming solar radiance. The black data are me saying we're going to look at what happens if you have no CO2 in the atmosphere and what we're going to have twice today's CO2 in the atmosphere. The blue data are data directly related to and derivable from the Stefan Boltzmann radiative equation. So we now come down to the equation itself. And what it tells us is that if, and this is a modest experiment I've done here, I have removed the entire atmosphere, hydrosphere, and biosphere. I've taken it all away and left the Earth a bare rock. And then I've worked out, using this equation, how much cooler it would be then. And it would be 9.3 degrees Kelvin cooler, not the 34 degrees you usually hear about. They make the mistake of assuming that if you take away the atmosphere, for instance, the clouds will still be left to reflect the sunlight back into space. Well, hello, they won't. So the answer is 9.3, and that's all. Now, we then go to a paper by one of the eminent scientists on the IPCC who tells us that 27% of all the warming caused by the atmosphere being there rather than not being there is caused by CO2. So that's 2.5 Celsius degrees of warming has been caused by CO2 from the moment when time began until today. That is all. Now, we then have to know how many watts per square metre does that represent. So we use equation number 1 in the middle there. That's from James Hansen, repeated in the IPCC's 2007 document. And what it shows is 24 watts per square metre of radiative forcing produces 2.5 degrees Celsius of warming. And that gives you a climate sensitivity parameter of 0.1 Kelvin per watt per square metre, rather than the 0.9, which is the IPCC's central estimate. Now, let's try to prove this result. Let's try to test it a little. The top result is our best estimate, that's the 0.1 figure, which gives you a warming in Celsius of 0.4, in Fahrenheit 0.7. The UN is at the bottom in red there, 3.3 Celsius for a doubling. And in between, I've done a couple of experiments. I've assumed that, for instance, we take CO2 to have caused half of all the warming. And even then, it's still a tiny fraction of the UN's climate sensitivity figure. Or you can ignore the first 50 parts per million and take Dick Lindson's uniform atmosphere from then on, and even that, 0.9 compared with 3.3. Or you can take both of those together, 1.6. So whichever way you press the numbers, trying to shoot down our own mathematical proof, you find that climate sensitivity is definitely low. Now, we're going to run this argument past some of the scientists here over the next few weeks to find out whether we're right or whether we're right. And we think we're right. And we hope to get this published, and if it is published, that will be the end of the debate. So now I want to end by saying that as the Copenhagen Climate Summit approaches, the ambition and interests of the bureaucratic centralists of the UN, the shadowy commissars who are the dictators of the EU, the energy imperialists of Russia, the military-industrial complex of China, and the scientific technological elite here in the US, against which President Eisenhower gave such strong warnings in his farewell address, will fatefully, and perhaps fatally, coincide. Whether or not any binding but pointless targets for curbing CO2 emissions are decided upon at Copenhagen, one policy they will all agree upon. The UN's climate panel will be given new powers, at first merely powers of monitoring, but increasingly powers of intervention, taxation, and legislation. As Maurice Strong, Jacques Chirac, and their ilk had always intended, the IPCC will emerge after Copenhagen as the prototype and nucleus of a world government. We have already seen this in the EU. We have learnt the hard way that supranational government is never democratic government, nor is it honest, nor is it cheap. Yet the highly placed conspirators who seek to ride the climate scare to world domination have reckoned without one thing: you. You are here, and you have not let the truth go, and you will not let the truth go. Thanks to you, it is becoming evident that the rent-seeking promoters of this great boondoggle, through the very scientific ignorance that they had sought to exploit in others, have merely deluded themselves. In the end, it will be here, in the United States, that the truth will first emerge in all its glory. Not in Europe, for we are no longer free. Not in Russia or China, for they have never been free. Not in the Middle East, for while militant Islam endures, it can never become free. It is here, in your great nation, a nation founded upon liberty, that the battle for the world's freedom will be won. It is you whose forefathers fought against ours for their freedom, whose fathers and grandfathers fought shoulder to shoulder with ours for Europe's freedom, and whose gallant sons and daughters now fight alongside ours for the world's freedom. It is you, the people of the United States, who will surely lead and inspire the world once more in this dark hour that might, but for you, have become a new dark age. You must not, and you shall not fail. Therefore, I end with the words of your poet Longfellow, addressed by Sir Winston Churchill to your president during the Second World War, during the darkest hour before the dawn. Sail on, O ship of state. Sail on, O Union strong and great. Humanity, with all its fears, with all the hopes of future years, is hanging breathless on thy fate.